Chapter 28 of the Riddle of the Sands. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gesine. The Riddle of the Sands by Erskine Childers. Chapter 28. We achieve our double aim. When exactly the atmosphere of misunderstanding on the stranded tug was dissipated, I do not know, for by the time I had fitted the rowlocks and shipped sculls, tide and wind had caught me, and were sweeping me merrily back on the road to Norderney, whose lights twinkled through the scud in the north. With my first few strokes I made towards the lighter, which I could see sagging helplessly to leeward, but as soon as I thought I was out of sight of the tug, I pulled round and worked out my own salvation. There was an outburst of shouting which soon died away. Full speed on a falling tide! They were pinned there for 5 hours sure. It was impossible to miss the way, and with my stout allies heaving me forward, I made short work of the 2-mile passage. There was a sharp tussle at the last, where the Riff Gut poured its steam across my path, and then I was craning over my shoulder, God knows with what tense anxiety, for the low hull and taper mast of the Dulcibella. Not there! No, not where I had left her. I pulled furiously up the harbour, past a sleeping ferry steamer, and, praise heaven, came on her, warped alongside the jetty. "Who's that?" came from below, as I stepped on board. "Hush, it's me." And Davies and I were pawing one another in the dark of the cabin. "Are you all right, old chap?" said he. "Yes, are you? A match, what's the time? Quick!" "Good heavens, Carruthers, what the blazes have you done to yourself?" I suspect I cut a pretty figure after my 2 days' outing. 3:10. It's the invasion of England. Is Dollmann at the villa? Invasion? Is Dollmann at the villa? Yes. Is the Medusa afloat? No, on the mud. The devil! Are we afloat? I think so still, but they made me shift. Think! Track her out! Pole her out! Cut those warps! For a few strenuous minutes we toiled at the sweeps till the Dulcibella was berthed ahead of the steamer in deeper water. Meanwhile I had whispered a few facts. "How soon can you get under way?" I asked. 10 minutes. "When's daylight?" "Sunrise about 7, first dawn about 5. Where are we bound?" "Holland or England." "Are they invading it now?" said Davies, calmly. "No, only rehearsing," I laughed wildly. "Then we can wait." "We can wait exactly an hour and a half. Come ashore and knock up Dollmann. We must denounce him, and get them both aboard. It's now or never. Holy saints, man, not as you are!" He was in pyjamas. "Sea clothes." While he put on Christian attire, I resumed my facts, and sketched a plan. "Are you watched?" I asked. "I think so, by the Kormoran's men." "Is the Kormoran here?" "Yes." "The men?" "Not tonight. Grimm called for them in that tug. I was watching. And, Carruthers, the Blitz is here." "Where?" "In the roads outside. Didn't you see her?" "Wasn't looking. Her skipper's safe, anyway. So's Böhme, so's the Tertium Quid, and so are the Kormoran's men. The coast's clear. It's now or never." Once more we were traversing the long jetty and the silent streets, rain driving at our backs. We trod on air, I think; I remember no fatigue. Davies sometimes broke into a little run, muttering "scoundrel" to himself. "I was right, only upside down," he murmured more than once. "Always really right. Those channels are the key to the whole concern. Chatham, our only eastern base, No North Sea base or squadron. They'd landed one of those God-forsaken flats off the Crouch and Blackwater. "It seems a wild scheme," I observed. "Wild? In a way. So is any invasion. But it's thorough. It's German. No other country could do it. It's all dawning on me. By Jove, it will be on the Wash, much the nearest, and as sandy as this side." "How's Dollmann been?" I asked. "Polite, but queer and jumpy. It's too long a story." "Clara?" "She's all right. By Jove, Carruthers. Never mind." We found a night bell at the villa door and rang it lustily. A window aloft opened and "A message from Commander von Brüning, urgent," I called up. The window shut, and soon after the hall was lighted and the door opened by Dollmann in a dressing gown. "Good morning, Lieutenant X," I said in English. "Stop, we're friends, you fool!" as the door was flung nearly to. It opened very slowly again, and we walked in. "Silence!" he hissed. The sweat stood on his steep forehead, and a hectic flush on either cheek, but there was a smile, what a smile, on his lips. Motioning us to tread noiselessly, a vain ideal for me, he led the way to the sitting room we knew, switched on the light, and faced us. "Well?" he said in English, still smiling. I consulted my watch, and I may say that if my hand was an index to my general appearance, I must have looked the most abject ruffian under heaven. "We probably understand one another," I said, "and to explain is to lose time. We sail for Holland or perhaps England at 5 at the latest, and we want the pleasure of your company. We promise you immunity, on certain conditions which can wait. We have only 2 berths, so that we can only accommodate Miss Clara besides yourself." He smiled on through this terse harangue, but the smile froze, as though beneath it raged some crucial debate. Suddenly he laughed, a low ironical laugh. "You fools," he said. "You confounded meddlesome young idiots, I thought I had done with you. Promise me immunity? Give me till 5? By God, I'll give you 5 minutes to be off to England and be damned to you, or else to be locked up for spies. What the devil do you take me for?" "A traitor in German service," said Davies, none too firmly. We were both taken aback by this slashing attack. You pig-headed young marplots! I'm in British service. You're wrecking the work of years, and on the very threshold of success." For an instant Davies and I looked at one another in stupefaction. He lied, I could swear he lied, but how make sure? "Why did you try to wreck Davies?" I said mechanically. "Pshaw! They made me clear him out. I knew he was safe, and safe he is." There was only one thing for it, a last finesse to put him to the proof. "Very well," I said, after a moment or two, "we'll clear out. Silence, Davies. As it appears we have acted in error, but it's right to tell you that we know everything." "Not so loud, curse you! What do you know?" "I was taking notes at Memmert the other night." "Impossible!" "Thanks to Davies. Under difficulties, of course, but I heard quite enough. You were reporting your English tour. Chatham, you know, and the English scheme of attack. A mythical one, no doubt, as you're on the right side. Böhme and the rest were dealing with the German scheme of defence, A to G. I heard it all. The 7 islands and the 7 channels between them, Davies knows every one of them by heart. And then on land, the ring of railway, Esens the centre, the army corps to mobilise and entrench. All nugatory, wasted. Ha ha! As you're on the rights—" "Not so loud, you fiend of mischief!" He turned his back and made an irresolute pace or two towards the door, his hands kneading the folds of his dressing gown as they had kneaded the curtain at Memmert. Twice he began a question and twice broke off. "I congratulate you, gentlemen," he said, finally, and with more composure, facing us again. "You have done marvels in your misplaced zeal, but you have compromised me too much already. I shall have to have you arrested, purely for form's sake." "Thank you," I broke in. "We have wasted 5 minutes, and time presses. We sail at 5, and, purely for form's sake, would rather have you with us." "What do you mean?" he snarled. "I had the advantage of you at Memmert, in spite of acoustic obstacles. Your friends made an appointment behind your back, and I, in my misplaced zeal, have taken some trouble to attend it, so that I've had a working demonstration on another matter, the invasion of England from the Seven Siels." Davies nudged me. "No, I should let that pistol alone, and no, I wouldn't ring the bell. You can arrest us if you like, but the secret's in safe hands." "You lie!" He was right there, but he could not know it. "Do you suppose I haven't taken that precaution? But no names are mentioned." He gave a sort of groan, sank into a chair, and seemed to age and grizzle before our very eyes. "What did you say about immunity and Clara?" he muttered. "We're friends, we're friends!" burst out Davies, with a gulp in his voice. "We want to help you both." Through a sudden mist that filmed my eyes I saw him impetuously walk over and lay hands on the other's shoulder. "Those chaps are on our track, and yours. Come with us. Wake her, tell her. It'll be too late soon." X shrank from his touch. "Tell her? I can't tell her. You tell her, boy." I was huddling back into his chair. Davies turned to me. "Where's her room?" I said sharply. "Above this one." "Go up, Carruthers," said Davies. "Not I shall frighten her into a fit." "I don't like to." "Nonsense, man. We'll both go then." "Don't make a noise," said a dazed voice. We left that huddled figure and stole upstairs, thickly carpeted stairs, luckily. The door we wanted was half open, and the room behind it lighted. On the threshold stood a slim white figure, barefooted, bare-throated. "What is it, father?" she called in a whisper. "Whom have you been talking to?" I pushed Davies forward, but he hung back. "Hush, don't be frightened," I said. "It's I, Carruthers, and Davies. May we come in? Just for one moment?" I gently widened the opening of the door, while she stepped back and put one hand to her throat. "Please come to your father," said I. "We are going to take you both to England in the Dulcibella. Now, at once." She had heard me, but her eyes wandered to Davies. "I understand not," she faltered, trembling and cowering in such touching bewilderment that I could not bear to look at her. "For God's sake, say something, Davies," I muttered. "Clara," said Davies, "will you not trust us?" I heard a little gasp from her. There was a flutter of lace and cambric, and she was in his arms, sobbing like a tired child, her little white feet between his great clumsy sea boots, her rose-brown cheek on his rough jersey. "It's past 4, old chap," I remarked brutally. "I'm going down to him again. No packing to speak of, mind. They must be out of this in half an hour." I stumbled awkwardly on the stairs (again that tiresome film), and found him stuffing some papers pell-mell into the stove. There were only slumbering embers in it, but he did not seem to notice that. "You must be dressed in half an hour," I said, furtively pocketing a pistol which lay on the table. "Have you told her? Take her to England, you two boys. I think I'll stay." He sank into a chair again. "Nonsense, she won't go without you. You must, for her sake, in half an hour too." I preferred to pass that half hour lightly over. Davies left before me to prepare the yacht for sea, and I had to bear the brunt of what followed, including, as a mere episode, a scene with the stepmother, the memory of which rankles in me yet. After all, she was a sensible woman. But for the other two, the girl, when I saw her next, in her short boating skirt and tam o' shanter, was a miracle of coolness and pluck. But for her I should never have got him away. And how good it was to be out in the wholesome rain again, hurrying to the harbour with my two charges, hurrying them down the greasy ladder to that frail atom of English soil, their first guerdon of home and safety. Our flight from the harbour was unmolested, unnoticed. Only the first ghastly evidences of dawn were mingling with the strangled moonlight as we tacked round the pier head and headed close reefed down the Riff Gut on the lees of the ebb tide. We had to pass under the very quarter of the Blitz, so Davies said, for of course he alone was on deck till we reached the open sea. Day was breaking then. It was dead low water, and far away to the south, between dun swathes of sand, I thought I saw, but probably it was only a fancy, two black stranded specks. Rail awash, and decks streaming, we took the outer swell and clawed close hauled under the lee of Juist, westward, hurrying westward. Up the Ems on the flood, and to Dutch Delfzyl, I urged. No, thought Davies, it was too near Germany, and there was a tidal cut through from Buse Tief. Better to dodge in behind Rottum Island. So on we pressed, past Memmert, over the Juister Reef and the Corinne's buried millions, and across the two broad and yeasty mouths of the Ems, till Rottum, a wee lonesome wafer of an islet, the first of the Dutch archipelago, was close on the weather bow. "We must get in behind that," said Davies, "then we shall be safe. I think I know the way, but get the next chart, and then take a rest, old chap. Clara and I can manage." She had been on deck most of the time, as capable a hand as you could wish for, better far than I in my present state of exhaustion. I crawled along the slippery sloping planks and went below. "Where are we?" cried Dollmann, starting up from the lee sofa, where he seemed to have been lying in a sort of trance. A book, his own book, slipped from his knees, and I saw the frontispiece lying on the floor in a pool of oil, for the stove had gone adrift, and the saloon was in a wretched state of squalor and litter. "Off Rottum," I said, and knelt up to find the chart. There was a look in his eyes that I suppose I ought to have understood, but I can scarcely blame myself, for the accumulated strain, not only of the last 3 days and nights, but the whole arduous month of my cruise with Davies, was beginning to tell on me, now that safety and success were at hand. I handed up the chart through the companion, and then crept into the reeling forecastle and lay down on the spare sailbags, with the thunder and thump of the seas around and above me. I must quote Davies for the event that happened now, for by the time I had responded to the alarm and climbed up through the forehatch, the whole tragedy was over and done with. "X came down the companion," he said, "soon after you went down. He held on by the runner, and stared to windward at Rottum, as though he knew the place quite well. And then he came towards us, moving so unsteadily that I gave Clara the tiller, and went to help him. I tried to make him go down again, but he wouldn't, and came aft. "Give me the helm," he said, half to himself. "Sea's too bad outside, there's a short cut here." "Thanks," I said, "I know this one." I don't think I meant to be sarcastic. He said nothing and settled himself on the counter behind us, safe enough, with his feet against the lee rail, and then, to my astonishment, began to talk over my shoulder jolly sensibly about the course, pointing out a buoy which is wrong on the chart, as I knew, and telling me it was wrong, and so on. Well, we came to the bar of the Schild, and had to turn south for that twisty bit of beating between Rottum and Bosch Flat. Clara was at the jib seat, I had the chart and the tiller. You know how absent I get like that. There was a bobble of sea, and we both had heaps to do, and, well, I happened to look round, and he was gone. He hadn't spoken for a minute or two, but I believe the last thing I heard him say—I was hardly attending at the time, for we were in the thick of it—was something about a short cut again. He must have slipped over quietly. He had an ulster and big boots on. We cruised about for a time, but never found him. That evening, after threading the maze of shoals between the Dutch mainland and islands, we anchored off the little hamlet of Ostmahorn, gave the yacht in charge of some astonished fishermen, and thence, by road and rail, hurrying still, gained Harlingen, and took passage on a steamer to London. From that point our personal history is of no concern to the outside world, and here, therefore, I bring this narrative to an end. End of chapter 28. Epilogue of The Riddle of the Sands. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gesine. The Riddle of the Sands by Erskine Childers. Epilogue and Postscript. Epilogue by the Editor. An interesting document, somewhat damaged by fire, lies on my study table. It is a copy, in cipher, of a confidential memorandum to the German government, embodying a scheme for the invasion of England by Germany. It is unsigned, but internal evidence, and the fact that it was taken by Mr. Carruthers from the stove of the villa at Norderney, leave no doubt as to its authorship. For many reasons it is out of the question to print the textual translation of it, as deciphered, but I propose to give an outline of its contents. Even this must strain discretion to its uttermost limits, and had I only to consider the constructed few who follow the trend of professional opinion on such subjects, I should leave the foregoing narrative to speak for itself. But, as was stated in the preface, our primary purpose is to reach everyone, and there may be many who, in spite of able and authoritative warnings frequently uttered since these events occurred, are still prone to treat the German danger as an idle bogey, and may be disposed, in this case, to imagine that a baseless romance has been foisted upon them. A few persons, English as well as German, hold that Germany is strong enough now to meet us single-handed, and throw an army on our shores. The memorandum rejects this view, deferring isolated action for at least a decade, and supposing, for present purposes, a coalition of three powers against Great Britain. And subsequent researches, through the usual channels, place it beyond dispute that this condition was relied on by the German government in adopting the scheme. They realised that even if, owing to our widely scattered forces, they gained that temporary command of the North Sea which would be essential for a successful landing, they would inevitably lose it when our standing fleets were concentrated and our reserve ships mobilised. With its sea communications cut, the prospects of the invading army would be too dubious. I state it in that mild way, for it seems not to have been held that failure was absolutely certain, and rightly, I think, in spite of the dogmas of the strategists. For the ease transcends all experience. No man can calculate the effect on our delicate economic fabric of a well-timed, well-planned blow at the industrial heart of the kingdom, the great northern and midland towns, with their teeming populations of peaceful wage-earners. In this instance, however, joint action, the occasion for which is perhaps not difficult to guess, was distinctly contemplated, and Germany's role in the coalition was exclusively that of invader. Her fleet was to be kept intact, and she herself to remain ostensibly neutral until the first shock was over, and our own battle fleets either beaten, or, the much more likely event, so crippled by a hard-won victory as to be incapable of withstanding compact and unscathed forces. Then, holding the balance of power, she would strike. And the blow? It was not till I read this memorandum that I grasped the full merits of that daring scheme, under which every advantage, moral, material, and geographical, possessed by Germany is utilised to the utmost, and every disadvantage of our own turned to account against us. Two root principles pervade it: perfect organisation, perfect secrecy. Under the first head come some general considerations. The writer, who is intimately conversant with conditions on both sides of the North Sea, argued that Germany is preeminently fitted to undertake an invasion of Great Britain. She has a great army, a mere fraction of which would suffice, in a state of high efficiency, but a useless weapon as against us unless transported overseas. She has a peculiar genius for organisation, not only in elaborating minute detail, but in the grasp of a coherent whole. She knows the art of giving a brain to a machine, of transmitting power to the uttermost cogwheel, and at the same time of concentrating responsibility in a supreme centre. She has a small navy, but very effective for its purpose, built, trained, and manned on methodical principles, for defined ends, and backed by an inexhaustible reserve of men from her maritime conscription. She studies and practises co-operation between her army and navy. Her hands are free for offence in home waters, since she has no distant network of coveted colonies and dependencies on which to dissipate her defensive energies. Finally, she is, compared with ourselves, economically independent, having commercial access through her land frontiers to the whole of Europe. She has little to lose and much to gain. The writer pauses here to contrast our own situation, and I summarise his points. We have a small army, dispersed over the whole globe, and administered on a gravely defective system. We have no settled theory of national defence, and no competent authority whose business it is to give us one. The matter is still at the stage of civilian controversy. Co-operation between the army and navy is not studied and practised, much less do there exist any plans, worthy of the name, for the repulse of an invasion, or any readiness worth considering for the prompt equipment and direction of our home forces to meet a sudden emergency. We have a great and, in many respects, a magnificent navy, but not great enough for the interests it ensures, and with equally defective institutions, not built or manned methodically, having an utterly inadequate reserve of men, all classes of which would be absorbed at the very outset, without a vestige of preparation for the enrolment of volunteers, distracted by the multiplicity of its functions in guarding our colossal empire and commerce, and conspicuously lacking a brain, not merely for the smooth control of its own unwieldy mechanism, but for the study of rival aims and systems. We have no North Sea naval base, no North Sea fleet, and no North Sea policy. Lastly, we stand in a highly dangerous economical position. The writer then deals with the method of invasion, and rejects the obvious one at once, that of sending forth a fleet of transports from one or more of the North Sea ports. He combats especially the idea of making Emden, the nearest to our shores, the port of departure. I mention this because, since his own scheme was adopted, it is instructive to note that Emden has been used, with caution, as a red herring by the inspired German press when the subject was mentioned at all, and industriously dragged across the trail. His objections to the North Sea ports apply, he remarks, in reality to all schemes of invasion, whether the conditions be favourable or not. One is that secrecy is rendered impossible, and secrecy is vital. The collection of the transports would be known in England weeks before the hour was ripe for striking. For all large ports are cosmopolitan and swarm with potential spies. In Germany's case, moreover, suitable ships are none too plentiful, and the number required would entail a large deduction from her mercantile marine. The other reason concerns the actual landing. This must take place on an open part of the east coast of England. No other objective is even considered. Now the difficulty of transshipping and landing troops by boats from transports anchored in deep water, in a safe, swift, and orderly fashion, on an open beach, is enormous. The most hastily improvised resistance might cause a humiliating disaster. Yet the first stage is the most important of all. It is imperative that the invaders should seize and promptly entrench a prearranged line of country, to serve as an initial base. This once done, they can use other resources, they can bring up transports, land cavalry and heavy guns, pour in stores, and advance. But unless this is done, they are impotent, be their sea communication never so secure. The logical alternative is then propounded, to dispatch an army of infantry with the lightest type of field guns in big sea-going lighters, towed by powerful but shallow draught tugs, under escort of a powerful composite squadron of warships, and to fling the flotilla, at high tide if possible, straight upon the shore. Such an expedition could be prepared in absolute secrecy by turning to account the natural features of the German coast. No great port was to be concerned in any way. All that was required was sufficient depth of water to float the lighters and tugs, and this is supplied by 7 insignificant streams, issuing from the Frisian littoral, and already furnished with small harbours and sluice gates, with one exception, namely, the tidal creek at Norden, for this, it appeared, was one of the chosen 7, and not, as Carruthers supposed, Hilgenriedersiel, which, if you remember, he had no time to visit, and which has, in fact, no stream of any value at all, and no harbour. All of these streams would have to be improved, deepened, and generally canalised, ostensibly with a commercial end, for purposes of traffic with the islands, which are growing health resorts during a limited summer season. The whole expedition would be organised under 7 distinct subdivisions, not too great a number in view of its cumbrous character. Seawards, the whole of the coast is veiled by the fringe of islands and the zone of shoals. Landwards, the loop of railway round the Frisian peninsula would form the line of communication in rear of the 7 streams. Esens was to be the local centre of administration when the scheme grew to maturity, but not till then. Every detail for the movement of troops under the 7 different heads was to be arranged for with secrecy and exactitude many months in advance, and from headquarters at Berlin. It was not expected that nothing would leak out, but care was to be taken that anything that did so should be attributed to defensive measures, a standing feature in German mobilisation being the establishment of a corps of observation along the Frisian coast. In fact, the same machinery was to be used, and its conversion for offence concealed up to the latest possible moment. The same precautions were to be taken in the preliminary work on the spot. There 4 men only, it was calculated, need be in full possession of the secret. One was to represent the Imperial Navy, a post filled by our friend von Brüning. Another, Böhme, was to superintend the 6 canals and the construction of the lighters. The functions of the third were twofold. He was to organise what I may call the local labour, that is, the helpers required for embarkation, the crews of the tugs, and, most important of all, the service of pilots for the navigation of the 7 flotillas through the corresponding channels to the open sea. He must be a local man, thoroughly acquainted with the coast, of a social standing not much above the average of villagers and fishermen, and he must be ready when the time was ripe, with lists of the right men for the right duties, lists to which the conscription authorities could, when required, give instant legal effect. His other function was to police the coast for spies, and to report anything suspicious to von Brüning, who would never be far away. On the whole, I think that they found the grim Grim a jewel for their purpose. As fourth personage, the writer designates himself, the promoter of the scheme, the indispensable link between the two nations. He undertakes to furnish reliable information as to the disposition of troops in England, as to the hydrography of the coast selected for the landing, as to the supplies available in its vicinity, and the strategic points to be seized. He proposes to be guide-in-chief to the expedition during transit. And in the meantime, when not otherwise employed, he was to reside at Norderney, in close touch with the other three, and controlling the commercial undertakings which were to throw dust in the eyes of the curious. Memmert, by the way, is not mentioned in this memorandum. He speaks of the place selected for the landing, and proceeds to consider this question in detail. I cannot follow him in his review, deeply interesting though it is, and shall say at once that he reduces possible landing places to two: the flats on the Essex coast between Foulness and Brightlingsea, and the Wash, with a decided preference for the latter. Assuming that the enemy, if they got wind of an invasion at all, would expect transports to be employed, he chooses the sort of spot which they would be least likely to defend, and which, nevertheless, was suitable to the character of the flotillas, and similar to the region they started from. There is such a spot on the Lincolnshire coast, on the north side of the Wash, known as East Holland. It is low-lying land, diked against the sea, and bordered like Frisia, with sand flats which dry off at low water. It is easy of access from the coast by way of Boston Deeps, a deep-water channel formed by a detached bank, called the Long Sand, lying parallel to the shore for 10 miles. This bank makes a natural breakwater against the swell from the east, the only quarter to be feared, and the deeps behind it, where there is an average depth of 34 feet at low water, would form an excellent roadstead for the covering squadron, whose guns would command the shore within easy range. It is noted in passing that this is just the case where German first-class battleships would have an advantage over British ships of the same calibre. The latter are of just too heavy a draught to navigate such waters without peril, if indeed they could enter this roadstead at all, for there is a bar at the mouth of it with only 31 feet at high water, spring tides. The former, built as they were with a view to manoeuvring in the North Sea, are just within the margin of safety. East Holland is within striking distance of the manufacturing districts, a vigorous raid on which is, the writer urges, the true policy of an invader. He reports positively that there exists, in a proper military sense, no preparation whatever to meet such an attack. East Holland is also the nearest point on the British shores to Germany, excepting the coast of Norfolk, much nearer indeed than the Essex flats alluded to, and reached by a simple deep-sea passage without any dangerous region to navigate, like the mouth of the Channel and the estuary of the Thames from Harwich westwards. The distance is 240 sea miles, west by south roughly, from Borkum Island, and 280 from Wangeroog. The time estimated for transit after the flotillas had been assembled outside the islands is from 30 to 34 hours. Embarkation is the next topic. This could and must be effected in one tide. At the 6 Siels there was a mean period of 2½ hours in every 12, during which the water was high enough. At Norden a rather longer time was available, but this should be amply sufficient if the machinery were in good working order and were punctually set in motion. High water occurs approximately at the same time at all 7 outlets, the difference between the two farthest apart, Carolinensiel and Greetsiel, being only half an hour. Lastly, the special risks attendant on such an expedition are dispassionately weighed. X though keenly anxious to recommend his scheme, writes in no blindly sanguine spirit. There are no modern precedents for any invasion in the least degree comparable to that of England by Germany. Any such attempt will be a hazardous experiment. But he argues that the advantages of his method outweigh the risks, and that most of the risks themselves would attach equally to any other method. Whatever skill in prediction was used, bad weather might overtake the expedition. Yes, but if transports were used, transshipment into boats for landing would in bad weather be fraught with the same and a greater peril. But transports could stand off and wait. Delay is fatal in any case. Unswerving promptitude is the essence of such an enterprise. The lighters would be in danger of foundering? Beside the point. If the end is worth gaining, the risks must be faced. Soldiers' lives are sacrificed in tens of thousands on battlefields. The flotilla would be demoralized during transit by the assault of a few torpedo boats? Granted, but the same would apply to a fleet of transports, with the added certainty that one lucky shot would send to the bottom 10 times the number of soldiers, with less hope of rescue. In both cases, reliance must be placed on the efficiency and vigilance of the escort. It is admitted, however, in a passage which might well make my two adventurers glow with triumph, that if by any mischance the British discovered what was afoot in good time, and were able to send over a swarm of light draught boats, which could elude the German warships and get amongst the flotillas, while they were still in process of leaving the Seals, it is admitted that in that case the expedition was doomed. But it is held that such an event was not to be feared. Reckless pluck is abundant in the British Navy, but expert knowledge of the tides and shoals in these waters is utterly lacking. The British charts are of no value, and there is no evidence, he reports, that the subject has been studied in any way by the British Admiralty. Let me remark here that I believe Mr. Davies's views, as expressed in the earlier chapters, when they were still among the great estuaries, are all absolutely sound. The Channel theory, though it only bore indirectly on the grand issue before them, was true, and should be laid to heart, or I should not have wasted space on it. One word more in conclusion. There is an axiom, much in fashion now, that there is no fear of an invasion of the British Isles, because if we lose command of the sea we can be starved, a cheaper and surer way of reducing us to submission. It is a loose, valueless axiom, but by sheer repetition it is becoming an article of faith. It implies that command of the sea is a thing to be won or lost definitely, that we may have it today and lose it forever tomorrow. On the contrary, the chances are that in anything like an even struggle the command of the sea will hang in the balance for an indefinite time, and even against great odds it would probably be impossible for our enemies so to bar the avenues of our commerce, so to blockade the ports of our extensive coastline, and so to overcome the interest which neutrals will have in supplying us, as to bring us to our knees in less than 2 years, during which time we can be recuperating and rebuilding from our unique internal resources, and endeavouring to regain command. No, the better axiom is that nothing short of a successful invasion could finally compel us to make peace. Our hearts are stout, we hope, but facts are facts, and a successful raid, such as that here sketched, if you will think out its consequences, must appall the stoutest heart. It was checkmated, but others may be conceived. In any case, we know the way in which they look at these things in Germany. Postscript, March 1903. It so happens that while this book was in the press, a number of measures have been taken by the government to counteract some of the very weaknesses and dangers which are alluded to above. A Committee of National Defence has been set up, and the welcome given to it was a truly extraordinary comment on the apathy and confusion which it is designed to supplant. A site on the Forth has been selected for a new North Sea naval base, an excellent if tardy decision, for 10 years or so must elapse before the existing anchorage becomes in any sense a base. A North Sea fleet has also been created, another good measure, but it should be remembered that its ships are not modern, or in the least capable of meeting the principal German squadrons under the circumstances supposed above. Lastly, a Manning Committee has, among other matters, reported vaguely in favour of a volunteer reserve. There is no means of knowing what this recommendation will lead to. Let us hope not to the fiasco of the last badly conceived experiment. Is it not becoming patent that the time has come for training all Englishmen systematically either for the sea or for the rifle? End of Epilogue and Postscript. And this is the end of The Riddle of the Sands by Erskine Childers.